You pull it back. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to 2018. My name's Jeremy Laurin. I'm the President and CEO of ventureLAB. Welcome, everybody, to our first session of the year. We started these sessions last fall around the topics of talent, capital, and technology. And the idea is to rotate through those three topics on a monthly basis so that each quarter you hear about each one of them once. And so obviously throughout the year you hear about each one of them 4 times. We were fortunate in the fall of last year to kick this off by leaning heavy on the ventureLAB Board of Directors. In fact, I think every speaker so far has come from the ventureLAB board, and today is no exception. So we've been very blessed here at ventureLAB to be able to pull this concept and get it started by being able to get folks who sit on the ventureLAB board to come out and participate in their respective areas. So today we're focusing on capital. We've turned on capital once already in the fall of last year from Janet Bannister, who is a partner at Real Ventures and has a seat on the board. So the perspective that day was very much from that of a venture capitalist, and it was a great session. For those of you who were there that day, Janet did a great job. Karna today, I'm going to introduce in just a second. Karna is going to give you a couple of different perspectives, and if we do this right through the conversation, as if I do my job, we'll get as much out of Karna as we possibly can from the perspective of raising capital with early stage companies, scaling companies, working inside public companies, and ultimately exiting public companies to even larger Canadian tech giants. So there's lots of great content here that we're fortunate to be able to dive into today. The sessions are always meant to be informal. That's why we try to do them like a fireside chat rather than someone standing at a podium and talking at you. So we hope to be able to set some context for the day from Karna directly to get started. I'll kick things off with a little bit of Q&A, and then what would be really great is from the audience, as many questions as you can lob at us within the time we've got, the better. So if you have a question, just raise your hands. We are filming the event so that we can push this content out. So if anybody has a concern about being on film, let one of the ventureLAB team members know. Otherwise, just know that you will be on film because this is part of an ongoing podcast series. When you do have a question during the Q&A portion, if you could just raise your hand first before you belt out the question and let us get a microphone to you so that we can capture your question. It's not so much for the people in this room to hear. We're in a small room. It's so that on our recorded session we clearly hear the question that you're asking of Karna. So if you could do that, that would be great. A couple of housekeeping things. The restrooms. We may need a washroom break at some point. Those of you who aren't resident in the building and don't know where they are, it's been written for me that they're on either side of the main corridor, right by the revolving doors. I should know that. I've been to the washroom, but that's where they are. Anyone has a question that don't know where the washrooms are, ask your buddy beside you. Good chance he or she does because they're a resident here in the community. Food and beverages, I think everybody got something to eat. They're laid out in the atrium. Help yourself. When they're gone, they're gone. This is a non-profit, so when they're gone, they're gone. Okay, but they are still out there. I talked a little bit about the concept for why we do this and the importance of it around these 3 subject areas, so I won't belabor that any further. We do push this content out. Those of you on our mailing list would receive email blasts about why we think talent, capital, and technology are really important for startups, scale-ups, and even growing multinationals that are here in the region. So that's why we center our efforts around these 3 areas. As I said at the outset, we're going to focus today on capital. For me, this is a real pleasure. We're going to have, we're in here today, if time serves well, to about 11:30. We'll cap it there at the latest. You have an opportunity today in a fairly unique and intimate setting to meet one of the nicest technology titans of our Canadian tech community that you'll probably ever have a chance to meet. So I encourage you to engage with Karna. Think of things that you want to ask. In a setting like this, it's rare to have an opportunity to do so, and I want to thank Karna personally for taking the time to do it with us this morning. Karna volunteers, as everybody else does on the ventureLAB Board of Directors. They lean in hard to provide their expertise, their insights, their background, their life experiences to help us build a successful tech accelerator here in Markham. So we're very fortunate to have him because I say Karna is the chair of the board. We're going to just sit now, have a bit of a conversation. I'll kick it off, but at any point in time, when you have a question, just let us know. So I wonder, with that intro, Karna, if you could give us 5 or 10 minutes, whatever you see best, as a bit of an overview of your life experience and your career path.
Yeah, maybe thanks, Jeremy. First of all, very pleased to be here. It's really fun to do these kind of things, and I always prefer a Q&A and a panel discussion than standing up and making a presentation. It's really not my forte to stand up on a podium and make a presentation. Conversational, process is a lot better to get most out of people. Just as the background, where I came from, I've been in business probably about 35, 37 years of working life. My first 20 years I spent in, like any other true Canadian, in a telecom company. Those were the universities, so we went to the University of Bell Canada, and I was there from 1978 to 1998, so it was a 20 years in Bell, and when I left I was their VP of new products. So any new technology that came into telecom those days, as the new regulation was happening, typically came from the labs that was under me in those days. Then I went into the darker side, people who actually do the manufacturing and provide the products. So I worked in Canada. I ran a couple of companies, both private and public. I was in the US for a good 7 years, ran a global company, which was a NASDAQ company of 6,000 people. I had a footprint in about 80 countries, direct staff in about 60 countries. It was a large company. And then I came back to Canada. I ran Certicom for a while, which was another Canadian pioneer public company. If you all today look at cybersecurity, and you just saw the BlackBerry's announcement yesterday that they are coming back, and all in the vehicle area and a lot of the new security. That's the technology they bought from Certicom. All of BlackBerry's security used to be done by Certicom. We used to do encryption for them. It was a public company. Then I, changed my lifestyle a little bit. A lot of family stuff happened. I kind of went into a couple of years of being quiet, and then for 4 or 5 years, I ran the ITAC, which was really a policy arm for tech sector. It's a non-profit association for all of the technology companies in Canada. So we had about 300 members. Name a company, whether it be Google, Microsoft, to a small chip manufacturer, they'll be our members. And we did a lot of the policy work with the federal and provincial governments to help the Canadian economy, what they need to do to create the right conditions for Canada to become a true player in the knowledge economy. And ventureLAB, when did I join ventureLAB board?
2011.
2011, so it's been there a long time. So my term is up soon, I think. And I also joined ventureLAB board in 2011, and being with ventureLAB for several years. It's been an interesting ride. Seen this organization grow from its at the very early days with very few people serving very few clients, up in Warden to what it is today, going through 400 people. For today's discussion purposes, my last couple of years I've been involved with a few companies. I invested in few, I sit in few boards. Raised a fair bit of money for them, one in Montreal, one in Toronto, and obviously another one in Toronto. And it's an interesting process in today's day to raise money in Canada for tech companies, depending upon what you have. So we'll talk about it later on. But Canada is, right now at a crossroads. When you globally look in, from a North American point of view, Canada is actually envious, truly a good place to be. I was recently in Middle East and Asia and talked to a lot of the people who want to set up investment arms in the North American market. They're all looking at Canada as an entry point for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is Donald Trump. Let's put that one aside for a minute. But overall, Canada is a civil society. It's a rule of law is actually good here. It has a high ecosystem of innovation, and there are some pluses and minuses that go with it, and I'll talk about it later on. And the new technology development in Canada is very, very robust compared to all of the G7 countries. When you look at it, we come up with number 4 or 5 in terms of just the innovation capacity. So a lot of attention from the people would be in the capital market. How do we invest in Canada? Now, having said all of that, raising money is not easy. It is always tough to raise funds because when you're an early stage company, people are really not investing necessarily in technology, they're investing in you. So they want to see the whites of your eyes, and do I trust you, and do I invest in you, and can you actually deliver the results I'd like to see? It's more investment in people or the individual than in the technology behind it. And so it's a very, very hard to raise money in the Canadian market. And the Canadian VC community still hasn't come back to where it needs to be pre-recession. Back 2008-9. I think in a heyday, and maybe somebody will correct me, I think the total number of VCs in Canada was somewhere around 95 or so. And that number, the overall market from VC's point of view is still not to the place where it needs to be. The gaps are being filled by a lot of other types of funds, and that's a good thing. So we can talk about that later on. So I'm going to just stop there. I've been involved in tech sector all my life, mostly on software, some manufacturing, and some hardware, but primarily on the software, both consumer and enterprise market, and in a global scale most of the time. Very few times I only played in the Canadian market. Most of my client base has always been either US or generally across the world.
Thanks, Karna. We'll give everyone a second to ruminate on that and think about any questions you might have. I'll start. I was thinking about the lead up to today. I was thinking about all the things that I've learned from you over the 7 years that I've worked for you, worked with you, worked for you, worked with you, and the awesome responsibility to try and get some of that out today, out for everybody. The opportunity here is to try and disseminate knowledge and share it so that we can all use it to our benefit and to our value. And I have learned a ton over the years. And one conversation in particular that pops to mind was about your time in the US. You said something to me one day, and I wondered if you might expand on it here, that I found personally to be very profound. And it was this idea that in Canada, companies are often founded by, in the very singular sense, a founder. And that in America, companies are very often founded by teams. And so you have this notion of more people to lean in, more people to share the risk, more people to share the reward, of course, but if you're really trying to build a real scale company, the idea of having a team of founders versus a singular founder, and in Canada we so often celebrate the founder. We write stories about the founder, we evangelize the founder, but in American culture, the companies are, think about Boston Scientific, there were 11 founders. I think about these examples that some of us know about. I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit from the perspective, because you said we invest in people, right? So from that perspective, Karna?
No, there is a difference. There is no question. I mean, in a similar session like this, probably about 10 years ago when I came back from the US and I was talking to a lot of people in an open panel, and the question was asked of me that, you worked in US and you also worked in Canada. What is the difference between the two markets? And what kind of holds it together? What are the key issues that separates the Canadian versus a US? And I kind of thought about it. It's a very deep question, but at the end of the day, it really came down to the psyche. The psyche of the markets and the entrepreneurs are very different in two countries. The US entrepreneurs, most of them, by and large, when you come across, they're trying to build an enterprise, or if you ask them what you're trying to do, they'll say, I'm trying to build $1 billion business, without even thinking whether it's possible or not. It's the audacious goal is always in front of them, driven by that. And the Canadian founders are really not that bold in, kind of saying, I'm building $1 billion business. They don't I have a software, I'm trying to build some product out and I'll go to the market. So it's going to lay out this story. But the US guys typically come out and say, I'm trying to build $1 billion enterprise. Now, to add to Jeremy's, the question Jeremy asked is separate differences. It also shows up how they operate. And it was really during the 2001-2 recession, right after the recession, I was in Boston. And I don't know how many of you know Boston, the 128 corridor is really the high-tech corridor in Boston. A lot of ICT companies and a lot of health tech companies. And after the recession, the place was devastated. And in fact, the campus I had right in Wakefield on 128 corridor, when I walked into that job, we had about 400 people, and one of my first tasks was to shave it down to 300 or a little less than that. So we almost lost 1/3 of our force during just past recession. So having lived through that in Boston and seeing these startups, what I'd went through, the local community, I used to chair a group called Boston Brain Trust. I was co-chair with one of the founders of Yankee Group. And thing that struck me, the difference between the two countries, how they operate in the times of difficulty is, one example I use, and because that's the one always comes to my mind, is one of these small companies was trying to make a bid for a job, and they did not have the architect. They needed to kind of lay out the technology in front of the potential customer. The another founder, entrepreneur, because he had to let go his architect, he didn't have the money, he was running low in cash, he really cut the company to the bone. And one of the competing firm, that entrepreneur basically told the guy, said, look, I'll lend you my architect so that you could actually make the bid. And it was a very profound experience at how they collaborated to help each other out, because they all realized that they are in it together. So the whole notion of when the water rises, the all boat rises with it was a real life example. So actually, and it kind of, then I started to kind of look at it saying the whole area was operating on a very collaborative fashion, not only in terms of company to company, but also within a company, there are multiple founders often. It is co-founder, and when you look at the companies up close, you'll find more co-founders in US setup than co-founders in and it's changing in Canada now. I actually really enjoy today's entrepreneurial culture in Canada a lot more than, I would say, generation after me. The third generation is a lot more robust than my generation or generation after me. They are more singular threaded. It's a lot more collaborative approach. There's a lot more co-founders within the young entrepreneurs today, and the US have kind of gone there earlier. And I always say it's not a negative, it's just part of a growing pain we as a country going through, because even smallest things, when we sold products and services as tech companies, we always went to US. So we are good in north-south trade. We never really sold anything to Nigeria or Poland, to never mind Asia, right? It was too far. And that's also part of the growing pains we're going through. So the whole collaborative nature in the US was a lot deeper and stronger within the tech community in the times of trouble. And also they had a shared setup, because they're not founders, just the DNA of the organization. They can lean on each other's family, even the family wealth came into it to support each other. So it was a very different dynamic than what we have seen here. Now it's changing here as well. I'm seeing more and more young entrepreneurs are coming together and working collaboratively and having a co-founder setups.
That's encouraging, really encouraging. Yeah, a friend of mine who built a public company here in Markham once said to me, and it just themes so well to what you just said. He said to me one time, take me to any street in anywhere America and point to me to a person who's built a $30 million company, and I'll point across the street to 20 or 30 more that have done the exact same thing. Repeat the same exercise in Canada, and I'll show you singularly a very unique individual who's been able to break through and do something in Canada that's very different. So to the piece about, there's a mindset and a mentality, almost a culture, that I'm going to build a scalable enterprise as an American entrepreneur versus I'm going to build to early exit as a Canadian. is something as Canadians we ought to all be concerned about.
I think there are a lot of issues here. I mean, so I'll use a public company as a benchmark, right? So when I was CEO of Certicom, we were listed in both NASDAQ and TSX. NASDAQ was getting too expensive to maintain and keep it in running, so we kind of got out of NASDAQ. Guess what happened? Company's value dropped 25%. We're a public company. Just because we took the listing out of, so within a year, the company's enterprise value went down 25%. So the Canadian companies are valued lower than US companies. That's, like for like, same technology, same caliber, we're lower valued. And that has a much deeper impact through the ecosystem than people would want to talk about, because we have more acquisitions than IPOs just because of that. If I was Google or any large enterprise out of Europe or US, or do I go hunting for new technology, I would come to Canada because I can find the same company 25% cheaper here than I would find on the south of the border or somewhere else. So of course I'll shop here. So that kind of gets built into the fabric of our ecosystem, so that our entrepreneurs are also looking for exit and become more serial in nature, so they'll do 2-3 companies over lifetime. And I'm involved with one now because it's a friend of mine, he's on his 4th company now. And all these companies exited, good exits along the way, but none of them was a couple of $100 million or $500 million company. They were doing $30-40 million of revenue, and they had a very solid exit. And he went into the next because the valuation continually is lower, and it becomes a attraction for large multinationals to go through the acquisition in the Canadian market than in the US market. It's just economics end of the day.
Everybody's warming up. We've got our first question. That's great to see. Just give me 1 second here. We'll pass you a microphone. Lisa, we may need a hand as we move around depending on how far these questions go. Thank you.
Okay, it's an interesting point you are saying about the difference between US and Canada. Does it change it now? Because the US becoming increasingly isolationist, Canada becoming increasingly global. Look at agreements with Europe, whatever. Whenever I see a new company raising in US, very, very soon I'm finding them having an office in Europe, having an office in Asia, and expanding globally. For Canadian company, despite having probably the biggest community from all these places, I mean, I see more French people here than in many European countries, for example. I see more Asian people here than in many. So despite having a lot of these connections, it seems that the ambitions of many Canadian companies just to go to the closest big market that is US. Is it going to change now? Do Canadian companies expect to become global as opposed to North American?
And have been. It cannot just be a US-centric market, US-centric company, and expect to be a successful technology company. That definition just doesn't wash anymore. Rest of the world, the rate of growth, even though the US market is the largest market, the rate of growth year over year in other countries is much deeper and much faster than what you see in the US. So if you want to create a growth cycle, you need to get on areas and the regions where the natural organic growth in the economy is a lot more robust than what's in the US. Just to give you an example. When I ran Converse, I was president of the real-time billing group, which really did a prepaid billing for telcos as a software. And we made a deliberate strategy that we're not going to come do anything in North American mature markets, because most of the companies here, whether Verizon, in those days AT&T and Bell and Rogers, or even some of the European large players, they're established and mostly postpaid. We would go where nobody been. So we went to Russia, we went to India, and they only had very few mobile customers those days. 4 years later, they were the largest mobile provider in the world. So what happened? We went from a 40 million business to 400 million business in 4 years. So the rate of growth has a lot to do with how you pick and choose, and most of the Canadian companies, to drive that scale, they need to get to global market footprint. You can't just do north-south. So that's the first part. The second part is, because you're doing that, and I think the Canadian entrepreneurs are a lot more tuned into that than previous generation, and that's what I talked before. There is a significant change that has shifted. And I'll tell you, I've been to several of these kind of panels, and I see people come and talk about, global market to the entrepreneurs or the audience, and the person talking about is been either, been a very senior executive in bank or telecom or somewhere else. The Canadian large companies of yesterday, they did not create global executives. I can tell you from my own experience. When I was in Bell for 20 years, my travel was Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, and maybe sometimes Vancouver. That was the size of globe to me. If I worked in Royal Bank, I could have been in every province in Canada, and that maybe in US for a conference, and that would be it. Rest of the country, these senior managers have gone global. So experientially, they have a different orientation. So that part has also changed now with the newer entrepreneurs. They're a lot more in tune with a global market than our generation, which was mostly inbred Canadian, grown up in the Canadian market, never really worked in a global scene, but they come and talk to audiences about global business. They've never done it themselves. It's very hard to teach people what to do in Nigeria when you land if you've never been there. Very hard, right? So that was part of the challenge we had. So to your last part, how does it affect the valuation? All of this is changing. How does it affect the valuation? The valuation part is a little problematic in Canada's case, because we are still small economy. Yes, we have created Nortel in past. Yes, we have created RIM. After that, yes, we have SNC-Lavalin. Yes, we have CGI. But we have a couple of larger companies, other companies as well in technology space. But you can count them in your hand. We don't have a lot of big companies. What we should do is create more mid-market companies. We're not even getting there, and it shows up in the data as you see when you look at what's happening in the capital market. So in capital market, most Canadian startups average. I'll use the average number here, and it was published by BDC. The average exit in Canada over the last couple of years have been about $16 to $18 million. Average exit in US in the same period has been $183 million. It is a factor of 10. And this data has been published by EDC. And that just shows we have not been able to generate the momentum that's needed to demonstrate the growth that is needed for our mid-sized companies. Whereas the US companies have demonstrated they can grow faster than we have over the last number of years. And I'm talking averages, right? There are always exceptions. There are always companies that have done well, done fast. A couple of them are a good friend of mine. It's a public company. If you look up over the last few years, a company like Redknee, they went through some recent troubles, but they used to be only a $50 million business when they're public. Within 4 years, they were about $300 million, $350 million business, right? So some of them you've seen them grown very, very rapidly. But it's more exception than what really happened. So there's still a lot of work to be done to change the valuation cycle of the Canadian companies. We're still not there. We're investing below US rate on venture market. So just to give you another reference point, around 2011, post-recession, our total VC market investment in Canada was $1.5 billion. By 2016, it went up to 3.2. In the same time, so it went up 3 times or 4 times, and that's 150% or 180% growth. Same time in US, the growth was well over 200% in the investment model. So just when you look at those statistics, we're still not at a point where we can command the same level of valuation as the US companies are doing. And part of it is we're a small economy. There are some more challenges involved, but we don't have access to the global markets. Most Canadian tech companies here, I would say, probably 10 million and up. If they're looking for a VP sales, chances are that VP sales they're looking for is in America. They're not hiring local because they need to reach to the global market.
Lots of questions now. Let's go over this way here, Lisa, first.
Hi there. Am I live?
Yeah.
Live.
I'm one of those sole, lonely entrepreneurs, and I have a question which relates to how do I move forward. I have a mobility assessment tracking tool for measuring people's mobility, health-related. It's working and it's in field testing with a hospital and a doctor's, a group of doctors' clinic. How do I move into getting real marketing going for this, especially from the point of view, I asked Ms. Bannister this same question. As I want to bring in other people, because I need marketing people, I need more on the technical side, and I need a lot of people to help. How much of my company should I expect to give away in this process? That's what I asked her, and I'd like to hear your response, and then I'll tell you what she said.
I don't know. I don't know what she said, but I'll give you my response. So I'll make it more personal, right? So if you're looking at somebody very senior to come in and take on the marketing and sales to grow your business and make it more robust and more attractive. So in my past life, I used to be CMO of a tech company. Twice been a CMO of tech companies. If you had come to and asked me, say, Karna, would you take the job? Right? If you gave me anything less than 10% of your company, I said, thank you very much. I got a lot better other choices to look at. Right? So for me, it's not worth investing my lifetime effort to work in your company if you want somebody that senior to come in, if you're not going to put somewhere between 7 to 10% of your company on the table, there is no upside for them. See, it has to be meaningful. And most entrepreneurs struggle with that. It's a tough decision. And that's why in US you find by the time the company is hitting 50, 60, 70, $100 million, you have 3 or 4 co-founders. Not that they all got together day one in the garage. Some of them came along the way and became co-founders because substantial amount of the company was put on the table for them to stay and become part of the family. I always tell entrepreneurs that, look, 100% ownership of a company valued at 0 or thereabouts is still 0. 10% of a company valued at 100 million or more is worth a lot more than that 0. So it's not a question of percentages, it's a question of absolute wealth. If you're looking at a business of wealth creation for owners, entrepreneurs, and the business people, you have to look at it in absolute dollar terms, not in terms of percentage ownership. And this is a big difference between Canada and US. We are stuck here, and I have that discussion with so many people. And I just went through one of the companies I'm involved with. It was a very hard discussion to ask the founder to step aside and bring in a CEO, and founder is just doing the technology. So we have brought in a new CEO with a very substantial ownership of the company. And the company was running at a 4 million clip every year. It was flatlining for the last 5 years. The year and a half we got the new guy in. Last year we closed at $20 million. It just went like this. And that is the part the entrepreneur needs to understand, that you have to give up ownership. It's very important to build a right team around you, so find the right people. It's a different skill. So you need to find the right people through right references and people who have done it before, have a proven, a proven track record. Surround them, give them a meaningful slice of the pie. They want it to be successful. They're not employees anymore. They own it as much as you do. So that's part of just logically approaching it. Then I don't know the details of your business. I don't know the product. I don't know the market. All of that stuff, pricing, positioning, all of that stuff will come. Do you have the right access to capital to grow? All of that other stuff comes in. But if you're looking for people, you have to make it meaningful to get the right people.
What did Janet Bannister say?
Interestingly enough, she said by the time you get to level 1, where you're looking for $1 million to $3 million investment, your first level, don't give away more than 10%. But she did suggest that you probably will have to do that. And then, of course, at each stage, there goes another 15, 20%. So you eventually, after level 3, you as the original is perhaps down to 20%. But 20% of something big is a lot better than 100% of nothing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question back here, and then one up here in the front.
Slight change of subject. If I start a dog walking service, but I call it the Uber of dog walking, and I do it through a website, I'm a tech company. If I create a physical hardware device that requires product design and manufacturing, but it monitors blood sugar rates, I'm a health tech company. And if I create some huge machine that you put in a water treatment plant full of metal and gears, but it's a new kind of filtration system, I'm a clean tech company. So from an investor's point of view, what is a tech company? And how does it differ when I approach an investor if I'm this or that kind of an actual product?
Good question. So there is depending upon which investors you're going after. The Canadian investors, I'll give you, it's a very personal view, so don't take it to the bank, right? So it's a observation. So I'll just make that claim right off the bat. Whatever I say, it's a very experiential on my lifetime, and what I have seen and what I've observed, right? So it's not something to be taken to the bank. So most Canadian investors have a very hard time investing in companies where there is no software, right? So the reason is simple. The reason is simple is they do not understand how the intellectual property works, right? Fundamentally, the Canadian VCs, what I call, are financial engineers. None of them ran business on their own. Most of them never ran a business, never had an operation. So they are ex-bankers, and I'm just generalizing, So they're financial engineers looking at a metrics on return on dollars over a certain number of, and they have to be true to their people who give them money. So if I'm investing in a VC, I want 5x, 10x in 5 years out. So when they invest in you, say, okay, if you don't do it, how do I? So they're always looking for the lowest risk process, which is a pure play software makes it low risk, right? The moment you have a manufacturing, you're getting into working capital scenario. Meaning, you're producing some gear. That means you have to have something on the shelf. Somebody will have to work on it. Then you got to package it, and then you're going to go out. It takes time. Working capital funding in Canada is very hard. Trust me, I'm living through one where it's a very high working capital, and it's been a pulling teeth, and it's tough to get funding for that. But you have to go to the very specialized people who fund it and everything else. Now, for working capital, the guys who would fund it, and I have a much deeper appreciation for them now, is, we always look at VCs to be the capital market people. There are a bunch of people out there are also providing debt financing. And I'm not talking debt financing like your paycheck loan debt kind of thing. I'm not talking the people who are sharking on the side. I'm just talking this is structured debt. So there are companies now in Canadian market, they provide debt against intellectual property. It's a very new, just started in Canada, which never really had. And it kind of changes the dynamic now. If you can service the debt, and you have some sort of a back-end, payout for them when you're successful, it's a non-dilutive capital. Why won't you take it? So working capital now becomes a fundable process, which most VCs tend not to do, Canadian VCs tend not to do. I won't name any VCs, but I know most of them in town. And when I go to them, and if I talk about this company, I'm working with, it's a high working capital, they'll say, Karna, we trust you, we know you, companies you bring, they've done well, and companies you affiliate yourself, they're all good. But you know what? Our metrics is layout, we need, software-based revenues. That's the model. So I say there is some difficulty there. But there are other capitals available. All I'm saying is there are other capitals starting to show up in the Canadian market. They're generally new. They're not around for too long. But these are all credible funds. These are people set up by people who ran businesses. They understand the capital need is to drive growth of the business, not a financial outcome on the other end for a VC. So if you need a debt capital, they give you debt capital. If you need a equity capital, they give you equity capital. If you need a mixed pool, they'll give you a mixed pool. So the new funding models are showing up in the Canadian market, which is a lot better.
You said right here behind Rob, yeah.
You mentioned that that VCs don't invest in products or ideas rather, that they invest in people. My experience, having participated in certain startups, is that they also invest in buzzwords. So for instance, there are events where they will allocate, let's say, 75% of their funding towards an AI play, or whatever the buzzword is, blockchain. For startups, how much do you recommend that we tailor our ideas towards where the money is from the VCs? And if we have an idea that doesn't fit what they're looking for, but it's a good idea, do we try to pivot it to where it's meeting those objectives that they're looking for?
So let me just clarify then answer the question. When I say they fund people, they fund people, but they also look at the product. It's not that they're devoid of technology. So technology is always there, but they always want to know that I can relate to you, I can work with you. So the person becomes more dominant variable than the technology itself, but the technology piece is still there. Second one, I think pivoting something just to fit the buzzwords is, I want advice for it. If in your business you have no use for a blockchain, just in the presentation throwing in a term blockchain is not going to do anything. They will catch on sooner or later. It is going to be actually impact the credibility of the individual, yourself and the organizations. So that I would not recommend you do. But it is important to understand the extensions of the businesses. Can your business leverage certain new technologies? So again, I'll use an example, the same one I used when this gentleman asked the question about production issues. A lot of the working capital hardwares, can you change the business model by providing some solution on a network basis, so it becomes service, on demand, on a SaaS model. If you can add a SaaS model of layer on the hardware, then it becomes very attractive for funders to say, oh, okay, I understand. Now you're going to have recurring revenue on top of your working capital, so I can diffuse my risk a little bit. So if you can get some value from it, yeah, then it's okay. but just for adding something for getting their attention, you only get their attention, you won't pass the second test. Because it'll be obvious that if you're a business not using blockchain, you throw in blockchain or AI, it's going to be, you get it through the door.
I see a lot of people getting.
Yeah, but the thing is, they'll get the first funding. It's going to catch up with it. Like it is. I have a hard time with it because these things on a vetting process will come out. Yeah, they'll get the door open because the label is right. But the moment they go through the due diligence, it's going to be obvious that it's not there.
Something maybe to add, just thinking about it from the perspective of a ventureLAB, there are regions, right, in Canada, in the US, everywhere in the world that are known for certain areas, right? Companies tend to cluster together, and sometimes I think for a startup or a scale-up, that is an important consideration about where you scale a business. If you're going to scale an AI company, good arguments to be made that you could do it in this region, and good arguments to be made that you could do it in Montreal. But it's probably not going to work real well in Winnipeg. Not picking on Winnipeg, just it is what it is. And I think that that's often, geographic based, where you're going to acquire talent, find investors, scale a company. That's sometimes not thought about as deeply and as richly as a founder or a group of founders need to. So that might be a consideration for you as well, is to think about from a sector of influence, not so much the buzzword that might appeal to an investor, but where are those regions where those types of companies, if I'm one of them, are actually located, because success draws a crowd, right? And you get these companies clustering together. That's the Valley phenomenon. That's certainly Boston's phenomenon around medtech and health sciences. That's Raleigh Durham's phenomenon around GPS and hardware. These things exist around the world. So something else maybe to think about as it relates to sector.
In the geography, it's important for you to figure out where you need to be in early days. I'll give you another example. A couple of years ago, a young fella came to see me. I won't name the names. And he had developed this mobile compression technology where he can see the video even on the old-fashioned flip phone. You can see the video at a fairly good phone in Canada. Not many, right? So the trend was clear. So I told the guy, I said, look, if you're going to do this business, maybe you should pack your bags and go to India. Because I used to do a lot of business with Reliant in my past life. So go to India. So the guy took the advice, and him and two other Canadian kids that work with him, they all kind of moved to India. 6 years later, I forgot about them. I had no tracking. I think just 3 conversations, and it was just a suggestion, kind of my reaction based on what the Indian market was in those days. Because in Indian market, most of the commuters sitting in a passenger train, they all have flip phones, and they do something. So put Bollywood movies in them with a good compression, they'll all be buying your stuff, right? So it was just a offhanded remark, and I say you should look at those kind of markets where they still use the flip phone, and compression technology could actually deliver some video at a capacity that's usable and consumable, and consumers like it, and they'll pay for it. 6 or 7 years later, I just got it, and he came through Mars as well. He had a phenomenal exit in India. One of the largest, aggregator bought them out 6 years later. And so picking geography is what you said is very important. You need to know, because you need to find the right talent. People who work on those skills are probably where the hubs are. The early adoption is probably where the hubs are, right? So it's the capital market tend to go. I mean, capital is like water, right? Even though it's very hard to raise money, there's always enough money. The water flows where the slope is. Capital will flow where the return is. It's just natural. So people say there is no money in the system. I just don't believe that. So there is enough money in the system. It's like water. It'll find its own space. But you have to have the right return. The money will get to it. Right? There is enough capital. So you need to kind of, geography is an important piece in that discussion.
Couldn't you just feel there was a great punchline coming? Like you could feel the building up. There was going to be a good story there. There's a question over here, Lisa. Sorry. Okay.
Hi there.
Hi.
Firstly, thank you for coming in and speaking to us. We really appreciate your time. My question to you is, in your opinion, in Canada, what needs to change within the startup community, either the founders themselves or how Canada operates? What needs to change for us to be more competitive and get to that next level?
That's it. I think the very first thing is really the entrepreneurs today, and I think most of them are new entrepreneurs, are probably thinking that way. They need to think about building an enterprise. You know, that drive needs to be that I'm here to build an enterprise, not to create an exit to build a cottage in Muskoka. So the objective of purpose of the company needs to change. Is the company to create me some wealth, and so I can retire and, you know, do whatever I need to do or go on to doing something else? Or am I here to build an enterprise? And if you do not know this individual, you should look it up in the web. There is a company, and this one I'll advertise because I'm quite enchanted by this organization, and I happen to know the founder. There is an organization in GTA India called SOTI, S-O-T-I. They build mobile applications for enterprises. And it was founded by a fellow called Carl Rodriguez. It's still private, and they're probably about 300 to 350 people, and got global footprint. But he was asked a question. He had an interview in Globe and Mail not too long ago, and he was asked a question: what is the exit strategy for SOTI? And he had the best answer. His answer is, what is the exit strategy of Microsoft? What is the exit strategy of Google? That's my exit strategy. Right? Nobody asked that question to those companies that started. What is the exit strategy of Amazon? Right? So he says, I'm building an enterprise, guys, so don't ask me about exit strategy. So that the entrepreneurs needs to kind of go down that path, saying, I'm here to build and if that doesn't happen, we as an economy suffer. Now, it's not all on entrepreneurs' back. I think our government and policymakers has a lot to do with it. The Canadian conditions are also not helpful. So the intellectual property rights in Canada are way deficient in a global market comparison. In fact, the intellectual property cartel is owned by US, right? It's a cartel. Most people don't, let's call spade a spade. It's owned by US. So just to give you two examples why I say that. Samsung sues Sony. Where did they sue them? One is a Korean company and one is a Japanese company. They sue them in Texas. Why? Because the IP settlement in US court is much more valuable than any other court in the world. They truly attribute the right valuation in favor of the intellectual property. And same thing happened. I did the same thing. When I ran a public company, it's a public knowledge, so I can talk about it. As Certicom, I took Sony to court for IP infringement. Where did I sue them? I was a Canadian company. Eastern District Court of Texas. Nowhere else. That was known as the Rocket Docket. That's where you went for IP jurisdiction. And if you won there, you got a settlement. They actually penalized the perpetrator for taking your intellectual property. So now that has not Texas anymore. Now it is in Delaware. Some of the other courts has come up. So the Canadian IP ruling is not helping our entrepreneurs. Because if you have an intellectual property and a large multinational infringes it, you have no recourse. You sue them, they will string it out over 6 years. You have no money, it'll be your head in the water and you'll drown. You would not be able to get the benefit. So government has to set policies and parameters that are much more helpful for our knowledge economy to be successful.
Does that mean in the short term that if you're on a technology company on the edge of technology, that just going through patents, it's not even worth your time?
No, I think you should do patent.
Okay.
You should do patent. I mean, if there is anything patentable, you should do a patent, because without patent, intellectual property has no value. And I mean, in old days, I sold you a glass of water. He gave me $2, and he took this water from my hand, and we had an exchange, and done with the transaction. Tomorrow, I don't sell you $2 of water. I sell you $2 worth of ideas, but I can sell the same idea to him, to her, and to her. So suddenly, 1 unit of intellectual property generated $50 from me, where 1 unit of physical product generated only $2. So to understand how knowledge economy works, it can be only captured once you have the right rulings in our intellectual property. It's not physical goods transaction anymore. I'm selling ideas. We're in an idea business now. And Canadian government's policies have nowhere close to understanding how that works or what needs to happen. It is really a big black hole in Canadian policy.
Our
Could I
friends.
back that up?
Sure.
Frank Bell again. Not only is IP important, and this mobility stuff, I have 4 patents in that, if you don't know, it's really important to patent in the States. If you can get a patent there, you can get a patent anywhere, and you can always go from there. But get a patent in the States, work through the trouble, do it yourself so you know how to do it. Don't get a patent agent, figure it out so you don't spend $50,000. But get it in the States.
Thank you.
Then you can get it in Canada, it's easy.
No, you have to do it in States. It's also faster.
Yeah.
In US, a patent gets done in 2 years, 2.5 years. Canada will take you 4.
This gentleman has the microphone, and then I think you guys had a question somewhere. Okay, so we'll pass it forward next.
Okay, I'm in a medical device business. We're a late-stage company. Our product is a innovative device that delivers a drug inside the body painlessly and has no sharp disposal issues. And in our business, we need access to the drug, so we have to make a license agreement with the drug company. In order to attract a drug company, I have to do clinical trials and compatibility studies. And I've already raised enough money to get to this stage, and now I'm basically topped out with all my local investors, friends and family and so on. So I need to go to the next stage. I need money to fund the capital, the clinical trials and the compatibility studies. And I came here today to find out other ways to raise capital to get this over the hump. And I've been around a lot. I've checked a lot of federal programs and provincial programs, and I feel like I'm hitting a brick wall. So I'm looking for other innovative ways to raise capital.
Dick, your business is in Peterborough, right? Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure, there are a couple of venture partners specializes in medical area, so that would be one people you need to talk to. 2, you probably should also talk to people who provide on debt financing. They're a lot more, because you have a running business now, right? It is.
It's a running business, but we're not profitable.
That you have to show pro forma. I don't know what the numbers are, but I think you need to show them a pro forma, and if it passes that over a certain number of period, because medical devices, extra challenges come in, because you have to meet the 579s and all that stuff, federal requirements in US to get the approval to get it done, right? So clinical trial. So a bunch of other issues on the debt market, see if that's available. The third, government you can always look at. You may actually use it's an online, I get their material as well. It's called Funding Portal. What Funding Portal does is it's a couple of people set up an interesting business, and they aggregate all kinds of government grants that are out there through it, so you don't have to search it, they can search for you. and find the one that's best suited for certain specific applications. That's all they do. They're figuring out all provincial, all federal, the pools of money, this and that, So they're providing a service. Obviously, there is a charge probably for it, some sort, I don't know. But something like aggregator may tailor your search a little better as to which program might be useful. Finally, which could be more attractive, is also look at who would be your natural business partners. Who would be the people who would buy your company, just for argument's sake, not that you're to sell, but who would likely buy your company, who would you compete with? So if you know your partners and competitors, sometimes if you have something, working with them could help. This is where collaborative is coming. Can you actually join forces with them at the early stage, right? And give them a piece of the outcome as well.
That's a good analysis there, but the last part, the company would normally buy us would be another drug company, but we can't interest a drug company because they want to see what your clinical trial data look like. And that's what I got to demonstrate. And once I get to that point, I think I can reach a lot of companies.
I was just going to offer another gentleman who sits on our board, is a retired J&J executive out of the medical device side,
Yeah.
Paul, and Paul regularly holds office hours here for these types of thorny, sophisticated technical issues. As a 30-year executive in a big company that, as you know, J&J is everything from the MRI to the thing you clean your ear with, right? It's soup to nuts. There's perspectives that Paul's been able to give startup and scale-up companies before that have been enormously helpful for them around regulatory. There might be an opportunity there, and I or any one of us would be happy to connect there. But is that specific to this or to Karna? I'll ask we do it offline then.
Sure.
But if you've got an opportunity there, then please, that's great, because that actually illustrates the point of the peer network. And the ability to talk to entrepreneur is oftentimes extremely helpful. But if you wanted to have a chat with Paul, who as I say is retired now, he does this regularly for ventureLAB clients and just does it here, and there may be some value for exploring that later. Just in the interest of time and time for Karna, I want to get that mic moved around to those who haven't asked a question. There's one here. Okay.
So thank you so much, ventureLAB, and thank you so much, Karna, for your invaluable insight. You talked about differences in the US and the Canadian marketplace of entrepreneurs, and I was talking to my co-founder earlier today as well. With one of the things that struck was the age where Canadian entrepreneurs get into business. You can tell we are in our 20s. We don't have a lot of traditional work experience, 3 years out of university. But we have a lot of passion and skyrocket ambitions and zeal. The ideas that we are working in, the inspiration came from my family's business, which has been there for 46 years, international trading and stuff. And somehow I probably got inspired in dinner table conversations at 12 years old, my dad talking about where my shipments are. It's very non-traditional. We have supply chain experience, but it's again, 2-3 years of experience and stuff. So when we talk about funding, we're an early stage company. How important it is to have age and traditional work experience of like 20 years or 15 years, because obviously we don't have that working in the industry, for example.
So I'll bring out another difference between US and Canada, and that will kind of maybe help your, these circumstances. In US, most of the early stage companies, regardless of age of the entrepreneur, they tend to go find people who would be an advisor or board to the company. Most of the Canadian entrepreneurs try to do it on their own. So, and some of them are running mid-sized companies but has no board because they say, look, I'm the founder, it's my business, it's running well, why do I need a board for? So to me, that kind of helps you to latch on to people who have done it or people you need as either advisors or board around you. It doesn't cost anything, so why wouldn't you leverage people's insight connections, the input to improve your business outcome. And this is another deficiency most of the private, small, young Canadian companies have. I would say good 80 to 90% of them would not have any board to talk about, just the founder themselves. So it's a very isolating process if you're a founder yourself, because you're doing everything. You're cleaning the floor to writing the code, right? So everything is getting done by you. So you're not really having time to get benefit from the people who have actually been through the process and gained that on your side. It's the old Chinese proverb I lay out, right? If you're trying to climb a mountain, right, and you're climbing a mountain and see people coming down, you should ask them what's the path, right? Because they've been there already, so they're coming down. Don't try to come up with your own path to the top, right? Which is possible. But why do that? Ask the guy who's coming down, say, which way did you, what's the best way to get up there? Because he's already been there. So for young entrepreneurs, it's always important to have a good advisory board or board around them. And by and large, even mid-sized private companies in Canada, you're not any different. They don't have a board. They don't have a board. And it surprises me that, it's something. It goes back to the collaborative issue. It's a whole leveraging other people's knowledge and the experience to help you is very important. And I think you need to kind of address it that way, and so the age doesn't become a barrier. You just surround yourself with people who can help you.
There's a question back here. Oh, sorry, and then we'll go here, okay? And we're gonna be near the end. We might, depending on how well you guys handle the mic, get these last three in. Okay.
Thanks for your time as always. Question for you is a little personal, but I was just thinking, if I want to be you, where do I start? And on top of that, no, you're mentioning with multiple co-founders. My team and I are multiple co-founders. It's a new approach for us last 12 months. But are you more inclined into investing into organizations that have multiple co-founders? And on top of that, if it's quick enough, when we are starting to achieve advisors around us, what type of percentage of your company do you want to give advisors pending hands-on or hands-off experience with you?
I think there are bunch of things. I think, let me answer the second part first. The advisors, depending upon what your needs are, right? For a small company, you always need to look at what are my missing pieces. So I don't know what your product is. Let's say the product you have and it is something that is, going after enterprise market. And within enterprise market, you're focusing on certain segment primarily. It could be, I'll pick, let's say, legal as an area. It would be useful to start reaching out to people who are affiliated with those professions to provide you some guidance as to what the gaps and overlaps are, so you kind of get that understanding deeper into the company. So it's very important to kind of map out what your strategic intent of the organization is and find the skill sets of the people who have done that to fill those gaps. No different than if I was to recruit somebody for a board member in a company I'm involved with. So even when I ran a public company, we had a very clear process of board members. We would have our strategic intent of the next 5 years laid out, and we'll put each board member's name on top saying who fills which boxes. And some obvious gaps will show up, then we say, okay, we need to recruit a board member for those specific skill sets. So it's no different for a small company. You need to have what you're trying to do, and then surround yourself with the people you need.
Thank you.
And if he wants to be you, how does he do it?
Yeah.
What's he do first?
What do you have for breakfast?
Bagel. Good Starbucks bagel.
Thank you for that. There's another question here. Okay.
Thanks for coming in, and thanks for ventureLAB. My question is that I do have a startup company. It's building 360 tours for real estate and commercial buildings, and also we do measurements, laser measurements, scanning. We are pretty much starting out, and we are pretty small. My question is that how can we attract senior for example, marketing or senior, any sort of any part of the business to our company, which is starting out, like how can we attract a 20 years experienced person to us, and even we give them percentage of the company, but why they want to come and work in a like a startup company with a young co-founders.
I think for anybody to come to a startup company, and that was my response to the first question, was for anybody to come to a startup company who's been in business for 20 years or 25 years, they're coming at expense of something, right? So because somebody who's been in business for 20, 25 years, either they're on some path of career trajectory or something. It has to be meaningful for them to kind of take this on as a challenge. So you need to kind of think through what would attract somebody to come to your business given this scale and size of the business, and what the potential is. What's the potential look like in this case, right? There may be not much today as a startup, but what would it look like 5 years, 7 years? So that's the story you need to sell. So look, if I have these set of skill sets, this could look like this, right? So that's the first piece. The second piece is where do you real estate, commercial building. There are probably conferences and sessions that take place focused on real estate. There are some venture capitalists I know, in Toronto. They've mostly fund real estate businesses. So those venture capitalists would have a connection. So you need to go talk to them and say, look, I need this type of people. This is what I'm looking for. Can you guys help me? I operate on the basis that whenever you go to somebody saying, can you help me with some of these areas, people would help. People generally tend to help and like to see other people successful. Sometimes they want a little bit in exchange. Most of them are not Shylocks, right? So they're not going to take a pound of flesh. But most of the time, people tend to try and help out if you're looking for. But you need to know where to go. And big part of thinking is, where do I go to get the set of intelligence I don't have today to either attract or structure something that can be attractive.
You get the last point, sir. You got the
Yeah.
microphone? Okay.
I don't have a question, I just have a statement out here. Just want to come back to what we started with, the difference between US and Canadian entrepreneurs. I was at presentation of Israeli startups yesterday. I was just amazed at the quality of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs out there. Just their psyche that you started with, just their makeup and what they want to do. And there are only two, and in some ways they are, in a way, like Canadian entrepreneurs. They focus a lot on two markets. One is US and second is Europe, right? Because that's where they have. I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot of Asian stuff with the Israeli startups. But it is amazing the quality of those entrepreneurs and how they are focusing on markets, and they go after that and they get it, right? I mean, in the US markets, they have been extremely, extremely successful. And they're doing two things at the same time, building enterprise, and second is exiting at a very high rate and a very high clip, I should say. So that's one thing, and I wish some of that we could learn from those startups out there.
Israel is a very, it's a unique, everybody wants to copy Israel. It'll be very hard. I know Israel extremely well. I have 3,000 engineers in Tel Aviv. So we were the largest technical employer in Tel Aviv for 7 years. And I've been to that country 50 times over a 7-year period. It's a very interesting experiment that what happened in Tel Aviv and is surrounding Israel, what they're doing. First of all, most of the young entrepreneurs have a very direct connection into the military. The consumption is through the military side, most of the application. So there is a very direct shepherding that takes place. Don't copy what happens in Israel in Toronto or even in Silicon Valley. It's just not going to happen. Conditions are not the same. So Israel is not a good good comparison that way. They do make a lot of good companies, but their exits are higher than Canada. But at the same time, they do not have Google and Microsoft and Nortels and the RIMS, right? They have some good-sized companies, out of Israel that came up. They exit at the mid-level to next to mid-level. If you look at Intel, one of their largest setup is in Tel Aviv, right? It's a technical hotbed. That's the culture kind of allows you to do that. The government has created policies for that. Universities provide the right framework. If you look at their campus they just built around Beersheba, that's the center of cybersecurity, global cybersecurity tomorrow, because whole university created a cybersecurity center at the center of the university. So all of the world's key forces are getting there, creating the right conditions.
I'm going to cap it there because I need to get you out of here and all of these people out of here on time today. So before we thank Karna, I want to just put an ad in for next month. We're actually really proud of this because this is an entrepreneur born out of the ventureLAB ecosystem. So it's ship of a growth curve that Nulogy has gone through, how he did it, how he hired right, the effects of attrition on a company that's scaling at that pace. Should be a fascinating discussion with a real scale-up entrepreneur who's building a great Canadian company that actually themes on many of the subjects, Karna, that you talked about today. So mark your calendar, save the day. Feb 13th will be the next one on talent, and Jason's coming out. Now, just to close, I want to thank all of you for coming out this morning and spending time and engaging with Karna the way you did. It's a much better session when the audience has questions to ask. You two gentlemen, make sure you talk afterwards. I want to make sure that happens. I want to say to Karna, you are a gentleman, a colleague, and a friend. Thank you for being a gentleman, a colleague, and a friend to ventureLAB in this ecosystem, Karna. Thank you.